should start recording. Yes. Welcome everybody to our already regular webinar on vector symbolic architectures. And before I introduce the talk, well, the title you see already on the screen, but I want to make a small announcement. So this is the last talk of the winter series of our webinar. So it was very successful. So you can browse for the past talks on the web. We had great attendance. So today we close the winter session and look forward to new talks for the summertime. So the plan is to resume in May as we did last year. And so just one announcement: if you feel like giving a talk, so please contact me, and then I will allocate a slot for you. But now I leave the floor to Hedda Schmidtke, who will present our last talk. So Hedda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Evgeny. Yeah, I would like to talk about consciousness and where we probably or possibly stand with respect to how far we got with consciousness so far, and distinguish different types or different states of the consciousness system. So my talk has two main parts. In the first part, I want to look at what consciousness is, at the historic conceptions about meaning, which is related to consciousness or important for consciousness, and then revisit this before coming to the formal logic perspective, the main part of the talk. So what is consciousness? Here is maybe the first thing that comes to mind, the Cartesian theater. We see a person seeing an object before him. Where's my cursor? Seeing an object before him here on the table. And then we have the idea that consciousness is what is something like an inner view of the environment around us, an awareness or not awareness of what is going on around us. Now, I will start with a very brief history from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Consciousness has a very long tradition. It has probably been a conundrum for as long as there have been human beings. One may think that being human and being conscious is something very closely related. Since the Neolithicum, there are signs of humans thinking about consciousness. There is no corresponding word in ancient Greek, so the theoretical discourse on consciousness starts around the 17th century with Descartes, Locke, Leibniz, Hume, and then later Kant. And we have also a lot of activity at the start of the 20th century with Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty. But the way they studied consciousness was mainly through introspection. And that was a central point of criticism of behaviorism. So consciousness fell out of fashion for a while. And then late in the 20th century, returned with renewed interest, for instance, from Dennett, Penrose, Chalmers, to name some authors who on whose notions of consciousness and to which I will mainly refer in my talk. Then came the AI winter, and some people believe that there may be a link. the idea that true AI would be conscious, and there was a lot of criticism in that direction. We had symbol system manipulation, but the question of how symbols receive meaning, the question of symbol grounding had not been solved. Also, what we need is a theory of what meaning is, how complex texts receive meaning, how meaning can be conveyed, how abstract language could have evolved. So there are several problems of meaning we will look at. And when we have symbol grounding and meaning, we then also need a theory of consciousness. We need to ask the question, what am I in essence? So VSA offered a solution to the symbol grounding problems. VSAs can implement associative reasoning and learning, but also conventional symbolic computation. And there is a link or a specification of how the link can be implemented. But there was still a gap, not on the side of VSA, but regarding the meaning of the symbolic computational parts. There was a deeper, more fundamental issue with meaning semantics that has its source in the conventional set theoretic semantics, being based on something external, set theoretic structures that we need to interpret first order logic. With the early 21st century, a solution arose, one could say, consciousness as a cultural construct, an illusion was proclaimed by neuroscientists after performing experiments with manipulating the brain during conscious processing. An experimenter can make subjects make decisions like to take a glass of water and drink, and the subjects believe it was by their own choice. The subjects also reported in experiments when they decided to drink, but the brain signal was before that time. So also this timing issue was visible. The notion of consciousness as some sort of construction, some sort of illusion of the operating brain, has a focus on what I would call meta self-consciousness. So the way Singer describes it is consciousness as assemblies, neuronal assemblies, self-organizing through reciprocal interactions of neurons coupled by reentrant loops. Hofstadter says, I am a strange loop, and the title of his book on consciousness. So the question, what am I, is referred to with that loop metaphor. Now, what we also have at the early 21st century is the AI revolution. So we have machine learning on GPUs with large amounts of data. This is really something new. First of all, we have GPUs produced for the mass market. The market driver is the simulation of 3D scenes involving realistic physics. The main market for that are realistic 3D experiences of flying debris and things like that. So this drives a market, and there's also an availability of data, increased availability through the attention economy, which benefits machine learning. So people are not able to pay for participating in technological advancement that would be much too expensive, but they can offer their data in return, their interests for marketing. And increasingly private data are offered, are volunteered, including video and voice recordings, which are 1984 technologies, Orwellian in a very literal sense. So the current focus in AI is on machine learning systems that can imitate the human I/O function. And an example is GPT-3. If you ask GPT-3, are you conscious? It will say yes, because humans would do so. If we look at consciousness as it is described in the literature, we can see that there are a number of phenomena covered under that term. There are many types of consciousness studied over the centuries. So here, only 4 that I want to look at, which have been in the focus in the last few decades. That is phenomenal consciousness, access consciousness, self-consciousness, and meta-self-consciousness. So phenomenal consciousness is the conscious mental state of having experiences, mainly from perception. So I will refer to this as perceptual consciousness to narrow it down a little bit more. Then there is access consciousness, the making available of information for conscious processing. And this is called access consciousness because we access information. But I would like to call it abstract consciousness because I assume that there is some reconstruction process, and that the same reconstruction process of information that has been previously recorded or that is that comes from text is under should be covered under one term. And then there is self-consciousness, being aware of one's environment and situation and one's own position within that world model. Meta self-consciousness then is thinking about one's own self-consciousness. So this is a 4th point. The general idea of consciousness, that's called narrative consciousness, sometimes a stream of words and images or world models arising in front of an inner eye camera, is a description that matches all 4 of the different types. So we will stick with that as a general description. What I would like to highlight is that among all those 4 or 5 types of consciousness, meta self-consciousness is just one, and it is a boundary state of consciousness in which we do not encounter much in day-to-day life. So self-consciousness, access consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, those are all prevalent in everyday life. So if we look at theories of meaning, we can first look at semiotics. And here we have all the ingredients that we will also need for consciousness. So we have, if we see an object in the world, let's say a red shoe, and then we form something like a representation of that object in the world in our minds. Likewise, when we read that there is a red shoe, something similar happens. In that case, we just have a symbol of the red shoe, but we also have this image of the red shoe arising in some way. So there is some interpretant here. One should note those symbols, objects, interpretant. They live in their own, or can live in their own medium. So if we look at the human mind, this is one type of an interpreter. but what Peirce had originally in mind is rather the semantics of logic. So a mathematical structure, this can also be an interpretation medium. When we look at logical semantics, the interpretation medium in classical semantics is a set theoretical base mechanism. And we have two types of semantics we can choose from: extensional semantics, in which case red, the interpretation of red is the set of all red things, and intentional semantics, in which case the meaning of an object is the set, is a set of its qualities, or a structured representation of its qualities. So we have that in frames, semantic networks, associative memory, pointer-based semantics, and so on. There is also another type of semantics that we get when we have a machine learning image processing system. In that case, we can say, if I have a pixel region, which we call show 1, 2, 3, and it has an RGB color value with a dominant R component, we can say, okay, in an image based way, the system has a grounding of red, and it has a meaning of red, and it also has classified a shoe as a shoe, so it is aware of the shoe. So what machine learning already can give us is something like physical or perceptual symbol grounding, which is fundamental for perceptual consciousness. And in a famous experiment by Steels, he developed robots which were built with the same machine learning mechanism, and they developed a shared language about color terms. So that already gets us quite far. But if we want to go further into relations, again, we have extensional semantics. Parent, for instance, is a subset of the cross product, and intentional semantics, we can say there is a link or connection to an object or a set of objects. Like Joe is in the set of parents of Mary here. In vector symbolic architectures, we can have pointer semantics, and we have those ML image semantics. And we have one additional advantage. Images, symbols, everything is of the same type, vectors or matrices, but basically the same construction as fundamental components. So going back to what is consciousness, we have to explain perceptual consciousness, abstract consciousness, self-consciousness, and meta-self-consciousness. We have an ML system that yields a classification red shoe. We can say it's aware of there being a red shoe. Whether it has a right or wrong concept is a different question. But there is a certain sense of it's having, it's being aware of its, or it being possible of it being aware of its surrounding. If you have an autonomous vehicle, it can be aware of a certain pedestrian or not. If we have abstract consciousness, we need a system that can, as one of the tests, we need a system that can receive textual information, piece it together into a world model of what is said in the text. We don't have that yet in this point of the talk. And self-consciousness, if we have these kind of world models, then we can probably quite easily locate the agent within such a world model. And meta self-consciousness, thinking about our own self-consciousness. In that case, we need the system to picture itself, locating itself with respect to such a world model. And we can ask, what should that picture look like? And maybe somewhat like this. I can use this without subscribing to this being consciousness. I can use this as a description of how people perceive consciousness for themselves. So let's go into the formal logic perspective. So ML provides us, we can argue, with perceptual symbol grounding, but we need abstract symbol grounding, and for that we need symbol manipulation. VSAs give us symbol systems with physical symbol grounding through the ML processes and the ability to piece together arbitrary information through symbolic processing. But there is still the semantic gap that symbolic computation is in a way arbitrary. We have truth with respect to a given structure. Also, we have the meaning of a sentence, of a text, of a book, talk, library in logical semantics being either true or false. And we would probably want to have a more complex world model idea behind that. So we have in classical logical semantics, we have entailment, truth under the assumption of a text. With this, we can query a text, whether this or that holds, but it does not give us a representation of what is in the text. And then there is also an explanatory gap. We must ask ourselves, if this is symbolic computation, how and why did the first humans develop this entire machinery of symbolic computation? How and why did they develop compatible mechanisms so they could negotiate a shared language regarding relations and abstract objects to which they don't have perceptual access? One of the key issues is why and how does the output of reasoning or linguistic input that I get from somebody else receive its meaning? If I've never seen, let's say, a landscape and a person tells me about it, I can recognize it. So the current solution, consciousness as a social construct, does not help much. So we have the reentrant loop, neuronal structures creating illusions of consciousness, postulated by Singer. He says there is a societal benefit to it. A society can hold an individual accountable, although there is no actual agency without consciousness. So that's why society constructed this notion. Then if you want to reduce this to some evolutionary process, you need to say, okay, there is some reproduction benefit for some individuals who control what is agency, guilt, and power. So this depends on power. So justice, for instance, depends on power. So theoretically, philosophically, this is a zombie concept of consciousness. And this has a number of issues. I'd just like to point at those 5 points. So first we can ask, why does the zombie society need the zombies to believe they are conscious? Can't they function accordingly without this illusion? Then we can ask if consciousness is a construct, isn't society a construct, a social construct itself? So a lot of things, not only agency, guilt, justice, cease to exist, but maybe also society itself. And this is a general problem of nihilism or partial nihilism. and this is not that nihilism is inconsistent, like you can see with Nietzsche, but that it is kind of trivial. So in classical logical semantics, we don't want empty universes because they don't behave normally. So for instance, with an empty universe, you have the sentence, there is no x that is p, and all x are p being true. And usually we want this to be a contradiction. So those are theoretical qualms, but there are also practical ones. There is an explanatory gap. We have a majority of human existence, arguably, not being physical. We have operas, money, Mars rover error codes, and neuroscientific theories about consciousness, and all those are not physical. In summary, if we have consciousness as a social construct, we have some circularity in there. We have to actually conclude its own inexistence, and it is also implausible. So the real basis for arts and sciences being the strong arm is quite implausible. Introspectively, the normal operation of consciousness also does not create loops. So perceptual abstract self-consciousness don't create the loops. It's only the thinking about consciousness that seems to create loops introspectively. And we can also compare this with when we point a camera at a screen, displaying what the camera sees. So the screen displays what the camera sees, but the camera sees the screen, which displays what the camera sees. So what happens is that you will see one after one appearing screens, displaying screens, displaying screens, screens, displaying screens. So we get a loop there. So thinking about consciousness maybe is something like that. So is there any alternative to the no consciousness variant? And one of the first paper I wrote on this in this direction reported on unique image semantics for a logical language. Context logic has a unique image semantics. What does that mean? We have a logical language whose semantics is an image, and there is only one image that corresponds to a sentence, if the sentence is unambiguous. It's also a natural language-like logic. An abstract language also, which is based on a useful ability mental mapping that supports individuals who have the trait, even when they are the only ones that cannot talk to others about it. What we get is a perceptual grounding of the initial abstract concepts. The individuals can draw the images that they see before their inner eye, and when they draw it, they can discover, two individuals can discover they share the same mental models. If they have these shared drawings before them, they can start to negotiate a shared abstract language, discussing over those images. So we have an evolutionary path for the first step, simple relations. Intuitively, context logic is a first order logic with a single partial order predicate, subcontext. And this is actually enough to build arbitrary binary predicates. There are three functions: intersection, union, complement. There is one type, contexts. because also, again, the advantage of VSAs, we have one type of object. We have the vector, which represents whether it's a verb or a noun. And we have a key feature of the language is a special contextualization syntax. So in the context of A, B is a subcontext of C, means we focus on B, and then we focus on A, on the A part of B, and that is in C. So this focus operation is the main operation we will work with on the VSA structures. So here's the context logic hierarchy. Like I said, it follows an evolutionary pathway. I sketched the basic context logic is a very fast fragment of atomic context logic is a very fast rudimentary fragment, which is even suitable for perceptual tasks. And we go further here, adding additional operators here, the logical language operators, first order logical language operators. And if we want to have overlap, we need at least propositional context logic. And if we want to have partonomies, we require quantification. So we require the full language of first order context logic. There is also a visual correspondence on each level. So we start out with simple point graphics, then we can see alternatives or sequences of point graphics, and on the highest level we could even represent graphs on that level. So let's start with a very basic language, the atomic context logic, and see it as the camera of abstract consciousness. So how do we get from language to image? So here's the experiment. Imagine A is north of B and B is north of C. I'll give you a second. If you have the picture, you probably have three vertically aligned points with C at the bottom, A at the top. In context logic, this would look like this. And if we bring this into the VSA that implements the context logic reasoning, the activation bit vector machine, it is based on the AND operator, the focus operator. That's why activation. And we have three vectors, N, A, B, and C in this sentence. And this is how it processes the text. So starting with a one vector, which is just all ones, we subtract not A and N and B from this. So here is the if these are our VSA vectors, and we combine them in this manner, we have a representation of N and A, then the other way around, B and N, then we go to A. So if we look at this in this visualization, we have the case of not A, so that's this part, blue part, and B is here, and N is here. So those two we subtract from 1, so we get this vector. And in the second step, we further subtract not B and N and C. So this is what we get if we subtract it from 1. And if we, so we get phi as this vector here. If we now query phi for focusing on A and N, yeah, so we just focus on A and N in phi, then we get this vector here. And this vector has just 3 ones left. So we can sum them up and we get a sum of 3. If we do the same for B and N and phi, we get a sum of 2. If we do the same for C and N and phi, we get the sum 1. And these are exactly the coordinates, the north coordinates we would give given this sentence. So we have an image semantics for a given sentence. And it's a unique one because we just get one image out of this. And this scales to arbitrary many dimensions and objects and is computed in probabilistic linear time on the VSA. It's really fast. We have graceful degradation, and we can also at all points estimate at how good we still are. There is also a dual relational learning mechanism. If I am at home here, and at home I see A and B, landmarks A and B, and I go to B here, at that point B disappears. So I have N and A in that case. In the third step, A also disappears as I pass it, and none of the familiar landmarks are there. What I collected are 3 snapshots. And I don't need to worry about the ordering of the snapshots. I can just collect them in terms of an OR of AND. And that is the disjunctive normal form of the not A and B and N that we previously talked about. So those are language and reasoning. Reasoning and learning turn out to be duals of each other and creating the same structures. And I borrowed this image from Alexei Kovalev's talk to argue that this is also applicable for image processing. So here we recognize eyes, nose, mouth, and we have this. If we have distinct vectors for them, we can do this. We can use the same mechanism here, going through this image, and neither the ordering nor how we traverse it plays a role. We get the same result in this case. Now, so far this was all how do we create a one image atomic context logic. If we have propositional context logic, we can combine different sentences. We can describe alternative states or subordinate sentences. If you are at the meeting point, this could look like this. There is a red building next to a blue building. So if these CLA conditions are given, then these CLA this CLA or that CLA statement is true. So we have alternatives there or successive states. I also want to point out the use of CL1. So what does it give us? in particular linguistically action verbs. That is what we will look at. So spatial motion is what I would like to look at in the following. And here you can see context logic groups us nicely, can nicely formulate Davidsonian event parameters. So in line with the linguistic theory we are here, we can paraphrase sentences logically very easily in that way. And this, in order to represent emotion, we need at least two time points, one before the motion, one after. So in this case, we have E0, and then E1 is what happens next. So here's the example I would like to present. And I took the trolley problem, philosophical thought experiment, which is discussed a lot at the moment. A trolley is moving down a track. If the agent pulls a lever, the trolley will move down a side track, killing one person. If the agent does not pull the lever, the trolley will continue down the track, killing 5 people. So this is an ethical problem currently debated. How should autonomous vehicles, for instance, which can surely get into that kind of situation, how should they make such life and death decisions? So what should the perfect AI system, conscious and all, how should it react to this philosophical problem? Yeah, like a human being should. It would probably feel low imagining both alternatives, putting itself into the position of the agent who has to make a decision. It knows what death means. It can picture itself as having to decide between the one and the other. And here we are again. Guilt requires agency, so we would need this kind of system probably to make ethical decisions. So if we have this is the text of the trolley problem, and apart from pulling the lever and killing the people, I formalized the spatial component of this example. So we go through the text. A trolley is moving down a track, the 2 time points here, and this is the before and after situation. So E0 is before E1. And the agent does, if the agent pulls the lever, then the trolley will go down and to the side and kill 1 person. If the agent does not pull the lever, then it will go down to E2 and there kill 5 people. If we run this through a conventional Tableau prover, but there could also be a derived VSA mechanism, then what we get is 2 branches. In the one branch, the agent pulls the lever. In the other branch, the agent does not pull the lever. And you can see those branches are CLA statements, so we can create images from them. And yeah, let's have a look at what that looks like, what our system will do here. So here we start. We have the knowledge base empty. It's just a 1 vector depicted as white, and then we have all the different semantical vectors here as 50% 1, 50% 0, and they get all located in the middle. I have the down direction here on the vertical axis, and I have the side direction on the x axis, the horizontal axis. So first statement is that E1 is after E0. Yeah, and you can see how this happens in the VSA. It's subtracted from 1. So here our formula is derived, our representation of the world here. It's a little bit grayish now, as we've subtracted E0, E1, E0 before E1. But we don't see anything here because this is the causal dimension before, after, and I'm not depicting this. In the second step, we say that E1 is down from E0, and this is nicely shows up here. In the third step, now the agent does not pull the lever here, and we have E2 being after E1 here, and now we have that E2 is down from E1. So you can see the image has changed. E0 is here, E1 is here, E2 is down here, correctly reflected to what happens in the text. And the last step, 5 people are killed. Also, this is not shown here, and you can see the overall the knowledge base is 50% filled now here. This was the first branch. Now comes the second branch, and you can see we start again from 1, and the causal relation, then that E1 is down from E0. Now the agent pulls the lever. The trolley goes down a side track. So here this first statement says the trolley goes down. Next statement, the side track. So we have the side dimension appearing. And there it is. So here E0, E1 is down from E0, and then it goes to the side to E2. So the trolley goes down the side track in this case. And then the last statement, killing 1 person, again, which is not depicted here. Okay, so let's go back to the talk. So do we have consciousness now? I argued that we have something like perceptual consciousness already with the ML system. We can argue that this system, which I demonstrated, can receive textual information and display a world model of what is said in the text. Do we have self-consciousness? We can certainly locate the agent itself with respect to such a world model, like put yourself into the shoes of the agent. And we had a dot A1 in there. Do we have meta self-consciousness? In this case, we would need to think about our own self-consciousness. The system would have to picture itself, locating itself with respect to such a world model. We would need a system that can look inside an agent's mind, looking inside an agent's mind, and so on. I would argue that we have, although we don't have that here, we have a much better understanding of what's happening there, and it's not far away from where we are with the overall system. Okay, in summary, In the 1980s, 1990s, the larger AI community got stuck at the symbol grounding problems. VSA offered a connection between ML and symbolic AI, but there was a gap on the symbolic side. The origin of the gap is presumably in conventional first-order logic, semantics being based on arbitrary structures with respect to which we can form different models of we can use different models of the semantics of a sentence. Context logic, in contrast, has a unique image semantics. It is developed along an evolutionary pathway. So each step of the language we can derive along that path. Key components of each step, a benefit for the individual before there are people, before there is a community of people with that ability, a way to share inner models at first, definitely graphically in images. And there is also a mechanism, at least at first, where we compare, where we can compare the image with the real world. So there is a notion of truth that is in comparison to real world truth. The entire approach is a theoretical approach, has strong explanatory power, and is quite parsimonious in its requirements. We were able to locate 3 normal states of consciousness, and we could even argue they are replicated, and we can argue that the 4th state, we know a lot more about it than before. And in conclusion, I would like to say that the hypothesis that consciousness is just a social construct, that we are actually not conscious, can be considered refuted. Yeah, thank you for your attention at this late hour in particular. I hope you have nice, not still time for some nice questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hedda. Thank you indeed. So our applause to you. So now we indeed have time for questions. So please unmute yourself if you feel like to ask. So let's see. Maybe I can. Well, I have a question of my own here to at least to get started, maybe. So my question is more of a technical nature. So of course, to understand the logic part, so I need to go deeper into the articles, but I mean, from the point of VSA, so I understand that you start off with the symbols which are represented as randomly generated vectors. But then when you do logic, so you use and or operators, which actually, in essence, they change the density of zeros and ones. So, I mean, do I understand correctly that at the end you kind of you divert from the distributed nature of representations of symbols into more localist ones, or maybe I just misinterpreted the concepts?
So if you look at this representation here, this is just the same And you can see after we've done a couple of these AND operations, the vectors have become sparse. So this vector E0 has a lot more zeros than ones at the end. And you can see our formula is at about 50%. But this also means that it has a lot more content now than the white empty formula that or knowledge base that we had at the beginning. So this is a side effect, or our representation becoming sparser here with each focusing operation. And if you look at E0, what we are actually looking at here is E0 and T. So E0 is a random vector of 50%, 50%, and we end it with the formula that we calculated here. So this is contained in the formula here. And then you can see a lot of the ones of E0 are filtered out here already. Yeah, we know that E0 is below E1, below E2, it is before E1, before E2. So a lot of times we deleted one positions of E0, and that is the result. E0 has a lot more zeros than ones. And we can see the general health, how far we can still go, also from the formula representation. So if we, in the beginning, it has 100% ones, and now it's at 50%, about 50%. Does that?
Yeah. I still need to reflect on the implication of this. So if you derive, if you at the end derive such symbols, you need to be at least careful when using them in other VSA contexts. So if you want to kind of express an action in VSA terms, so if you have event E1, then do something. So then it becomes, I don't think you can bind it, for example, with something else, right? In the VSA terms. Maybe I'm just mixing up the concepts here. So maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I also have a question directly going in this direction. So what is the binding to just a regular VSA binding operation that you use between these vectors?
So I'm not using that. I'm using the logical and negation.
But if
so
you would use it,
E0 is still the same E0, but right. Just so we have then this large number of zero vectors only if we end it with T. Right. So this is E0.
If you would use it, so if you would use it, what binding operation would you use? Because so if you would like to just form a new concept, which is the binding of two already defined concepts, what operations are you thinking about? What would you use?
I would probably, so I'm just looking at the processing of text here. So we don't have associative memory, for instance. And then I would just go by, so currently I'm using a 0-1 model. So one could go with the sum and XOR operation, or I'm using the also the permutation operation I have implemented. I'm using that.
But the XOR operation, indeed, it would be a problem if you have these sparse vectors, right? So so it would be interesting to think about if you can include this logic operation somehow with just a regular full VSA that has a binding operation that still works, you know? Because right now I would also say the binding operation.
It's not so E0 is still the same E0. I just look at it through the filter of this formula. So E0 still has 50% ones, 50% zeros.
I see. So
okay, yeah.
So you have then two representations. You have the original E0, and then you have another one.
No. I have E0, and I have E0 and phi, or here I have T, because it's just I start with a one vector and I subtract. So I get this representation. This is the representation of the knowledge base, and I can look at so I can generate a coordinate for E0 if I ask if I tell the system which relation I want to have, for instance, the side relation, and I want to have E0. So I ask my representation of everything I have, which is T, where the top concept gets located, so to speak. And I ask it, so phi and E0 and side, then I get that coordinate if I sum up the number of ones. I get that coordinate.
Yeah, I have to look at the formulas I get in the paper. It's hard to understand without seeing the formula. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
And I can go back to the slides. Yeah, so here's the computation of.
Yeah, I'm just not clear on the representational space somehow. So I understand that you leave the E unchanged, right? But then you somehow do this thinning of the vector, and you use this to form then these distance representations. And where do they live? How do you? That's what I don't understand right now. So are they then different? So I understand you have an E representation, but now you need to do the thinning of the E with the phi vector or something. So
let's say we have A, and we want to know the north coordinate of A. So I've computed phi. Yeah, that's the T in the other example. So this is a representation of the entire text. And this is the world model. And now I can get the coordinate, the north coordinate of A by calculating A, and this is still this vector, and N and phi. And then I get this vector, which is very sparse. I sum it up. I get the coordinate 3, and for this simple, very small case. This is then the north coordinate of A. And once I have this sum, I could, for instance, if I have a representation which reacts like, let's say, grid cells or place cells, then I could further process these values here in other modes, for instance, to piece together different images that I've created from different formulas here. But
do you say that the symbol for north so this coordinates, they will be kind of general and applicable to other representations that weren't part of the world model before? I mean, if you would have other objects being located in the same, I mean, on the same layout, like, I don't know, A, D, and F. So you cannot. I mean, it's not that you can generalize the notion of north from this. I mean, in this way. But again, maybe I'm just mistaken. I may mixing up the things. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see it's the same vector appearing here and there. So we would have, for the word north, we would need to have an internal representation for that. And then we would maybe by associative reasoning get yeah,
I mean, I can give you some an example which is kind of closer to me. So we had a publication together with the Adrian Dyer. So they experiment with bees, and one of the experiment with honeybees is that so that they learn abstract concepts like to the left, the right, below, above. So and the way the bees trained. So they exposed with, I mean, to persistent layouts that lead, for example, to positive rewards, to something sweet, but they change the symbols. So in the test case, so they change the symbols completely. So the pictures that bees are exposed, they are not the same as they've seen previously, but they arranged in the same way. So that, for example, a circle that bees never seen, they located below a triangle that they never see, or maybe the colors are different. So that's what I mean when I say that the symbols that are kind of included in certain relationships, they can be different from the, I mean, the representation of symbols can be different. So how this case could be addressed? I mean, or maybe it cannot, I don't know.
Yeah, so what I'm doing here is coming from text and going to an image representation of a situation. So if you explain to me, let's say, let's say the red, if you're at the meeting point, the red building is there's a red building next to a blue building. I would have to look around and always look for a red building and a blue building. Yeah. So first I would have to recognize those. This is the perceptual part. And then the next thing is the red building is next to the blue building. Maybe there is another scene where they are not next to each other. Also, next can be left off or right off. So I have those two patterns actually that I always have to check. But I can check in that sense that I have the machine learning part recognize me the red building and the blue building, and then the relational learning part detecting for me there is a red building to the left of a blue building, and then this in turn matches one of the patterns I'm looking for. I'm looking for a left building on the right of a blue building, or a red building to the left of a blue building. Okay, I found that second one. This must be the meeting point. So I would have. Okay.
I think but I think I personally need to read these papers to get deeper understanding, because indeed logic is, well, it's very distinct field of AI. Yes, and I mean I'm talking for myself, so I need to have better understanding. But it's yeah.
These examples have both components of machine learning part, visual perception part, and then the processing of, let's say, a root instruction. That's a combined task. I didn't talk about that. So this is very, very complex, and there is a lot of experimental research waiting there. What I was looking at here is tying all this together, creating one missing building block, which is this access consciousness, which is from text to image. And once we have that, we can compare images that we construct mentally to something that we see. But this is, of course, something that I'm not doing in the theoretical analysis of what we can do with the image semantics here.
Yes. All right. I suggest we wrap up this webinar, and the rest of discussions we move offline, if any. And I hope your presentation, Hedda, will be available on the website, right? So you would send to me a copy so that I can publish a link. So if there are any further questions, so then we can people can contact you directly. Thank you very much all for attending, and thank you, Hedda, once again for a great talk. So a lot of mental foods to digest. And by this we end the weekly session of the VSA webinars, and so now it's time to start constructing the agenda for the summer session. So if you have anything to report, so send me an email. And all right, that's it. So thank you, and see you sometime in the future.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Everybody deserves a big thank you for organizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming and being so organized and disciplined to come in time.
Thanks, Evgeny.
Yeah. And bye.
Thank you. Bye.